On my first video of this channel, I said I was going to be learning Korean using comprehensible input. And I've since changed my mind on that because it just wasn't working for me. And I think it's simply not a good way to learn a language from the ground up. If you can't comprehend the input at all, I don't think it's a good method. And I know there are counter examples of people who did it. And if you'll allow me to use a metaphor here, the way I think of this is that imagine you're trying to melt ice. You have a bunch of or butter, or let's say butter. You have a big soccer ball size thing of butter, and you're trying to melt it on a stovetop, like on a pot or a pan. And like obviously the most important element of melting the butter is going to be heat. And for the metaphor, let's call comprehensible input the heat. So any kind of input, like let's just say input in general is heat. You're never going to learn a language without input, period. So yes, it's the most important thing. But if we have a big soccer ball sized thing of butter and we're trying to melt it, we want as much of the hot surface area touching the butter as possible, right? So that top of the butter isn't even making contact with any of the heating part of, maybe there's going to be some passive like heat coming up and stuff, but we're wasting surface area. And so what we want to do is take a spoon and start breaking the butter up to make it get heated better. And in this kind of strained metaphor, we want to comprehend the input as soon as possible, and that would just be more efficient. And I could build up on this metaphor for another 20 minutes. I probably really could, but I think I'll just leave it there and just think about that. Like, because whenever I hear these people advocating you should only use comprehensible input, it's, your pronunciation will be better. It's maybe at first it won't feel as fast, but you'll quickly eclipse people who only were learning on traditional methods. Like after a year or two, you'll be way ahead of them, even though you feel like you're not doing anything at first. But it always just comes off to me like you're watching somebody get a spoon out trying to break the butter up, and you're like, no, don't do that, you only need the heat. And I'm just like, you can't convince me that I shouldn't use a spoon too. Like, yes, I'm going to keep the heat on, but I'm also going to break this butter up with a spoon and stir it around and melt it faster. It's going to be faster. So my experience, I'll talk a bit about my actual experience trying to do this. I To be like full disclosure, I had used this textbook for like a week or two when I decided I was going to switch to comprehensible input. So I did have like those first few lessons of grounding. I knew like the verb for to be, and I'd also probably watched several hundred hours of Korean media up until that point, which is kind of the impetus for actually learning the language in the first place, is that I've been watching a lot of Korean stuff. So, I picked a few words up here and there. I had some kind of ear for the language that from that exposure. But I started just watching shows that I wanted to watch without subtitles. I started rewatching a show I liked, and I started watching a new one with no subtitles. No Korean subtitles either. Just zero subtitles. And like, to be really honest with you, I barely understood anything. And the guy who convinced me to do this, like not me personally, but his videos that convinced me to do this, was like, yeah, that's what's going to happen. You're not going to understand anything at first. And again, it just felt to me like I was watching butter slowly melt in a pan with a spoon in my hand and deciding not to use the spoon. Like, why am I not stirring that around? Because and like, I'm going to make a case for my method, um, which is really a more traditional method in general. But I do have my own like one weird trick that's really working well for me, and I feel it's like I don't know. It's very counter to the idea that you just consume media and it will come to you kind of thing. And don't get me wrong, like it's very powerful. Like I think, to give you an example, for my Chinese at this point, that's arguably one of the best things I can do is just find something I want to watch that I actually just want to watch and watch it and enjoy it and focus on it, turn the subtitles off, the Chinese subtitles as well. Just watch, watch, watch. And I think I would get really good because the input is comprehensible to me. I'm actually understanding most of what I watch, and words pop up that I don't understand, but I begin understanding those when I see them over and over, when I hear them over and over. So, I definitely think that once you starting to understand, it becomes a super effective technique. But it's like going back to the butter metaphor. It's like, yeah, once the butter is all touching the heat, once all the butter is actually touching the pan, then yes, you don't need to stir it anymore. It's kind of like that. But maybe it still helps to stir it a little bit from here and there. So I want to talk a bit about what I'm actually doing that's working well for me with Korean and to an extent with Chinese. But I will say that I think I'm, as far as Chinese goes, I do think one of the best things I can do is give myself more, just consume more media, and I'm not doing that as much as I should. I'll just admit that right now. But for Korean, what I'm doing, I think, is working really well, and I am consuming a lot of Korean media still, but I'm watching with English subtitles because I otherwise am not going to do it. And that was really my experience when I tried to do comprehensible input, was that, like, one, I was not understanding most of what was happening. And don't get me wrong, like, I could follow you. I could generally tell you what was happening, as because you can see things happening, and I picked out a few words here and there. But most of my understanding was just from the visual element of things happening on the screen, and me, and being a human and knowing what kind of things humans feel when their face is, things like that. But none of the words were really getting through. And to make another point, like, not only were none of the words getting through, but I really couldn't even hear the divisions between the words. It was all just often just a big wall of Korean where I just couldn't process it, right? But the second thing that happened was that I found when I'm enjoying a show I really like, I will stay up way later than I should to watch one more episode. And especially when I get toward the end of a series, it's like, well, there's 4 episodes left. I'll be up till 4 a.m., but I could finish it tonight. And somehow that's like an incentive to keep going. But when I'm watching it and without the subtitles, like, I have to force myself to watch one episode. It rarely did I go on, oh, let's watch one more. It was like, okay, I've done it. Like, I'm done for now. And, I could see the writing on the wall with that. Like, okay, yeah, maybe if I really could force myself to do this for 3 hours a night, and if I could even have the time to do that, it would start working. But I don't, like, I just could tell I'm not going to do that. Whereas with more, I am going to do this other thing that I do. And let me talk about that now. So I have this book, Integrated Korean, and I will say that I want to just show you, like, where the book actually starts, because I don't want to, I'm not trying to make out that I'm like some super genius or something here, but like, so this thickness of the book is like teaching you Hangul and giving you like introductory stuff. And then the rest of this is the actual meat of the book. Although there's appendices here. So like, let's say this is the meat of the book, right? You can't see that. The appendix is like that, and the beginning is that. And then this is the middle. And I lost my place that I was at, but let's see here. So I'm this far into the book. Like, I'm well over halfway done with it. I'm on lesson 5 of 7. So, and I'm not like racing through this. I would, there's definitely things in here that a few words in here that I don't actually remember. If you press me on them, I'd be like, I would probably understand it if I heard it, but I couldn't recall it from like nothing recall or whatever. But so what I've been doing, and I want to just talk about one really specific advantage of the method I've been doing, because I think this method is going to sound really off-putting to people, but like the dialogues are about this long. So this really is not a lot. This is just really not a lot. But each chapter does split the dialogues up into, or the lessons are split into 2 dialogues per lesson. So you get like, imagine 2 of these per lesson. And then there's also a narration which combines, kind of combines both of the lessons together and is a really good like review tool when you've done both of the dialogues. So what I've been doing is just memorizing all the dialogues. And I think I mentioned this a few times, but it takes me maybe 30 minutes to an hour to memorize the dialogue. And, it's really just comes down to like a brute force thing. You memorize 2 sentences at a time and you say them over and over to yourself. I'll do this in public sometimes and I kind of just whisper it so that I don't like sound insane. And then I'm very like, writing helps me a lot for learning. So I will start writing it too. I'll say it a lot. I'll start writing it down. And then at some point it's like, okay, dude, these sentences are burned in. I've got them. And then I just move on to the next few sentences. And you can see like, on this chapter, I have this little mark here. This was at some point, like I'd memorized this whole chunk. And then I said, okay, like this chunk is good. I'm just simply going to memorize this separately now. Like I'm not going to try to combine them yet. And I usually do that. Like I'll have a point. I think I did that on this next one as well. Yeah. So like this one, there was kind of like this just, it depends, it depends on the dialogue. It depends what you specifically are struggling with as far as like processing, understanding. But like those chunks help me as like, okay, I've got this first chunk done. Now I'm going to treat the second chunk as its own thing and memorize that. And then it becomes pretty trivially easy to combine them together at the end, is what I do. And so if I sit down focusing for like 30 minutes to an hour, I can be done with this whole process. I can have the whole dialogue memorized. And I don't translate, but I don't memorize without understanding. I never do that. Like, so I make sure I understand the sentence and then memorize it, but I don't translate. And so what happens is after like an hour, I've got, this dialogue is no longer just in the book that I have, it's in my brain. Now, what happens after that is throughout the day, I start recalling the dialogue, either whenever possible out loud. So if I'm driving, I just the whole time I'm driving, I'm just saying this dialogue over and over to myself. If I'm walking my dog, I'm doing it. If I'm just, in any kind of situation where I can do it, I do it. And what usually happens, like right after I've memorized it, when I'm recalling it, I'll forget. I'm not perfectly memorizing. Like I'll forget something always. And whatever I forget, I try to bring this with me when I can. Like if I'm going somewhere with my kid, I'll put this in my backpack and I'll just have the backpack on me. And I also have the audio on my phone. So like when I forget, as if I definitely can't remember something, I try to quickly get this in check and figure out the thing that I forgot and fix it. and then once I forgot it and looked it up, it's like it's in there, you know, like it's really hard to forget something twice like that. And you might, you know, you might forget something else. I might do that, and then the next time I'm practicing, maybe a few hours later, I'm trying to say the dialogue again, and I forget a different thing, but then I look that up. So then the next time I'm sitting down with the book, I'll just try to I write the whole dialogue out by hand. Um, I have like I have this notebook here, and I've just been and I try to do it without looking at all, like just just over and over and over writing this stuff. Um, as much as and then I do those exercises in the book at some point, like they have like the homework or whatever. Um, so I write it down, and then I try to say it again, and then I listen to the audio again. And probably the one thing I could be doing in this method better is listening to the audio more often. I like to practice myself in pronouncing, which is like the opposite of the comprehensive input, right? But I think it was like Evil Dia said this, and it really stuck with me, is that when you are talking, that is also giving yourself input. Like I'm giving myself input when I talk to myself. And so, but usually like what happens is I'm doing it, and then I listen to the audio, and because I've done it so many times by myself, to myself, usually some element of the pronunciation is off. And so I listen to the audio, and when there's a difference in the audio compared to what I've been practicing all day to myself, it immediately jumps out to me like, oh, that was wrong. And I fix it. So that's kind of my method. And I talked about like sentence building and sentence mining that I do as well. I did mention this once before. Like I think I'm just reaching the point where I have enough vocabulary that I can really start to initiate that process. And I think what I'll be doing is like I'll memorize the dialogue, and then probably I'll say the dialogue, and then I'll make sentences to myself. I'll ask myself questions and answer them, and I'll kind of alternate like that, like dialogue, sentences, dialogue, like just like that when I'm practicing to myself. And so if it's not already clear, the really powerful part of this method, and the I know I sound like I'm trying to sell you on this. It's not going to work for everybody, but I think people, when I tell people like, yeah, just memorize the dialogue, I think that just immediately people are like, no, I'm not going to do that. Like, dude, I'm not memorizing the whole thing like that. It's just a hassle. I don't want to do it. But what it actually frees you, because it like liberates you from like, oh, I got to do Korean now. Let me get my book out. Let me get a pencil out. Let me make sure no one's bothering me. Let me put my headphones on. I'm going to sit down and study, or let me get my Anki deck out on my phone and look at my phone. Like, I spend an hour on initial memorization investment. I spend that initial hour cost sitting down and having to tediously memorize this. But once I've done that, for the rest of the time I'm on this lesson, I can practice it without anything. I can be walking around in the park and just go, I'm going to work on my sentence. I'm going to work on the dialogue. And I just start saying it. I can start building sentences. I don't need the book in front of me. I don't need paper. I have everything I need right here to practice this lesson because I've memorized it. It's really hit me recently, like how effective that is. Because I was like, my kid has snowboarding lessons on Saturday, and I just kind of like wander around the snow and the ski lodge and stuff. And I can walk around and just practice this. I go park the car, and I walk back to the mountain. I'm walking. I can do the dialogue 5 times, walking from the car to the mountain. when I'm driving to the mountain. It takes an hour to drive from Seattle to the mountain, and I can practice the dialogue hundreds of times in the car. And I've been memorizing I've have Chinese paragraphs I memorize, so I alternate Korean and Chinese, and I can do all of this like without anything, and it's just really cool to be able to do that. Um, Whereas with the comprehensible input, like if that was my sole method, yeah, you could have like input on in the background, and that was one thing somebody recommended was like you watch something the night before, and then you play just the audio back during the day, during your work day or when you're driving or whatever. And so I think like that, that could be effective, but like I felt with the comprehensible input, I was on the hook to sit there to really feel like I was moving the needle on it. It felt like I needed to be going about 2 hours a day. And it felt like that 2 hours would have to be me sitting there, eyes on the screen, watching a show that I was barely understanding. And now instead, I feel maybe every other day I actually sit down with the book and write stuff down. But every day I'm practicing this stuff. I'm practicing this dozens of times per day. And I think with language, that's one of the more effective things to do is like, it's better to practice. It's probably better to do 10 5-minute sessions throughout the day than it is to do one 50-minute session, because you're getting that extra frequency. You're giving yourself time to forget and then recall again. And it's, yeah, I mean, we'll see how well it works, right? Like I mean, to be fair, I've pretty much done this with Chinese like a long time ago, but I've definitely felt like I finished another Korean drama last night, and something is happening. Like the neural pathways that are forming, and the amount of vocab I've picked up along the way on this, like just this. And I will make yet another argument for textbooks, man. Like they give you the stuff you need to know. I know like I see so many people complaining about these boring textbook dialogues, and yes, they're boring in a sense, but like you need the boring words first. The boring words are like the base of your pyramid. Yeah, those fun slang words or whatever you might want to learn, like those are useless if you can't seamlessly express like where something is, right? Like in Korean, like the way you say where something is, using like the a particle or whatever. Like the book knows which things you need to get under your feet before you can really walk and run. And what I've found is after learning those, that's the spoon breaking the butter apart. Like now when I'm watching these dramas, like suddenly, and I do have the English subtitles on, right? But like suddenly I'm understanding a lot of what people are saying. And there have been moments like I was trying to think of an example. Like I don't remember what they were actually saying, but like I had to like I was looking for something, and I looked down for a second and I wasn't able to see the subtitles, and then like I heard them talking and I understood. And it wasn't anything totally, it was probably something really easy, like but like even a month ago I would have pretty much anything anyone said, if I wasn't looking, I would have been in the dark. But a lot of things are starting to pop up where I'm like, oh, I understand. And it's not like, it's not a artificial, like, because I have these whole sentences that I keep hearing. My input are these sentences over and over, right? Of people talking to each other, saying really basic stuff, but that means that I have these like words like "iseo" are just burned into my brain, and I don't have to think when I hear those at all. yeah, I don't. So yeah, I mean, that's really all I have to say on that. I think yeah, let me know what you think if you've actually tried memorization like this before. I don't hear a lot of people talk about this as a method that they use. Um, a lot of people talking about Anki decks, but very few people just like straight up memorizing big chunks of text. I feel it's actually quite underrated. So thanks for watching. Bye.